Today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast is brought to you by the American Pharmacists Association. APHA has partnered with Your Financial Pharmacist to deliver personalized financial education benefits for APHA members. Throughout the year, APHA will be hosting a number of exclusive webinars covering topics like student loan debt payoff strategies, home buying, investing, insurance needs, and much more. Join APHA now to gain premier access to these educational resources and to receive discounts on YFP products and services. You can join APHA at a 25% discount by visiting pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Again, that's pharmacist.com/join using the coupon code YFP.
One thing that we talked about even before we got married, we decided together that we both definitely wanted to live way below our means, less than 50% of our income, just because that's what made us feel safe.
You're listening to the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, a show all about inspiring you, the pharmacy professional, on your path towards achieving financial freedom. Hi, I'm Tim Albrecht, and on this week's episode, I pass the mic over to Nate Hedrick, the real estate RPH and co-host of the YFP Real Estate Investing podcast, as he interviews two pharmacists, Michaela and Jacob Soppe, about their home buying journey. Michaela and Jacob recently worked with Nate through the YFP Real Estate Concierge service to connect with a local preferred agent as first-time home buyers in the current market. So whether you are a first-time home buyer planning to move or looking for an investment property, get started today by scheduling a free call with Nate by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com and clicking on buy or refi a home at the top of the webpage.
Hey, Michaela, Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Excited to chat today. We're talking all things real estate. I'm taking over the Tim and Tim show here on the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, so we can talk a little bit more about real estate today. So again, appreciate you guys joining us.
Absolutely.
So we are here to talk a little bit about navigating the current housing market, right? So you guys are first-time home buyers, just closed about 2 months ago on your first house. And what we thought we would do is kind of sit down and talk a little bit about that, talk about what it's like to buy a house in the current market, what it's like to be a first-time home buyer, how you guys navigated that, and just kind of get that information in front of people. So before we dive too deeply into the real estate side of things, maybe give us a little bit of background on your pharmacy journey so far, and kind of what you guys are up to.
I graduated in 2018 and I immediately got a job on rotations. I met with one of my preceptors and they wanted to open a pharmacy and they wanted me to open it for them. And that's something I'm interested in. And so I opened it. That was 3 years ago and we're continuing to grow and I'm very happy with it. We're a clinic pharmacy, but we also do long-term care. We also do diabetes clinics, and we're just starting up hepatitis C clinics.
That's great.
So I graduated in 2019. We both graduated from Ohio Northern, and we actually got married while I was on rotations. So he basically said, "Hey, how do you feel about moving an hour and a half away from Columbus?" And I'm like, "Okay, that's great, but I have rotations in Columbus." So I started working with Rite Aid after I graduated as a pharmacist and kind of floated all over the place because we didn't really know where we'd be living for sure. And then worked with them for a couple years. And at the end of that, in January, I got a job working at a local hospital. So I do mostly inpatient, but I also have a mix of some outpatient stuff and long-term care in there with that as well. So I'm kind of running all over the place, but I love it.
That's great. That's excellent.
And we finally made it out closer to where Jacob works. So
that's nice, especially when you've already got long days at the hospital or at the pharmacy. You don't want to add an extra long commute to that. So that's great.
Exactly.
And when you guys graduated from pharmacy school, and I know it was different years, but when you graduated, was buying a house kind of always in that mix, or was it always part of the quote unquote next step, or was this something that came along later?
We knew we wanted to buy a house eventually, but there was student loans in the way that kept me up at night.
Sure.
And I was like, can't buy a house until we pay off these loans. And so after about 2 years, we paid off the loans. And that's when we started looking for a home.
Yeah, it was definitely student loans first. And then, it all worked out around the same time where my job brought us, instead of an hour and a half away for Jacob, it's now 5 minutes away. And at that point, we're like, okay, we're ready to find a house because we're going to be out here for a while.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, I know I've talked to others who have that feeling of like, man, I cannot buy until these are gone. And so you guys took that and said, yeah, let's make sure that's the case. Let's go all in on the loans. And then once that's done, then we'll go ahead and buy a house. Do you feel like was that crippling at all? Or was it just like, this is what we have to do to get it done?
It was definitely the second one there. We just felt like we had to do it. And felt like it was the right way to go for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of like, let's still act like we're college kids for a couple years, not buy a bunch of brand new stuff. Like most of our stuff came from our families or stuff I had from college. And so until the loans were gone, we didn't really spend much money on anything else. Like we'd go traveling, but other than that, it was just loans completely. Like our entire paychecks went to it basically.
Yeah, avoiding that lifestyle creep can be a really great way to get ahead and make sure that those loans could be knocked out first. So that's awesome. Were there any other factors that were holding you guys back? I mean, was the market something that scared you, or talk to me a little bit about that too? Was it just the student loans, and once those were gone, you were ready to move?
Yeah, the other thing that was holding us back was, like I said earlier, I was driving an hour and a half one way to work each day. So a total of 3 hours when we started, and Michaela was still in school. We wanted to see where she was going to end up working. And then when she ended up moving closer to my work, it worked out because it was like just after we paid off our loans. So we'd end up looking for a house at our old employer where I was still driving 45 minutes. And I really like the idea of living like right next door to work and the gym and church. And we'll get into that later. But
I guess something I should say is that we moved 4 times in 3 years.
Yeah.
And progressively each time, every time, like my position changed, basically going from rotation student to floater at Rite Aid to actually having a store at Rite Aid to getting the job at the hospital. Basically every single time we moved closer and closer to where Jacob was working. And now it definitely just where are we going to be settled was kind of like a factor that was holding us back slightly too. Because like my goal was always to get a job closer to where Jacob was working, but just we didn't know when that would happen. And it ended up being at a really convenient time for us.
That's great. And that's a good segue, because one of the things I want to talk about today is choosing a location and some of the steps that go into that kind of getting ready phase of buying a home. And that's actually step number 1 of 6 steps that we're going to talk about today. So we put together a video series, and actually there's a guide out there. We can link to that in the show notes. But if you head on over to yourfinancialpharmacist.com, we have the 6 steps to home buying. And what I'd like to do is actually walk through each one of those steps and kind of get your take and your experience as first-time home buyers and see what information we can share with our audience. There's a lot of people that are probably in your shoes or who are about to be in those shoes here pretty soon, where they're graduating, they've got a lot of student loan debt, or they're ready to buy a home. And now it's time to figure out, okay, what does that actually look like? And more importantly, how do I do that in this kind of market? Because it is quite the seller's market. It's very competitive out there. And so trying to get a home today is more difficult than it's been before. So we'll start with the first step, which is making sure you're ready. A lot of this step includes things like choosing a location, determining what is important to you guys, and also setting a budget and not letting the bank set the budget necessarily, not just going out and asking for the biggest loan we can get, but setting our own budget. And so when you guys sat down and said, okay, we need to figure out if we're ready, what did that look like? Was it a formal process for you, or was it just like, I don't know, I've been on Zillow, let's go take a look? What was that like for you guys?
There was definitely a lot of Zillow involved. So before we made our final move here closer to work, the apartment we were at, we were initially looking for houses there because it seemed like a good, central location at the time when I was with Rite Aid still. So I think Jacob was on Zillow every single day, just, browsing houses, probably for half a year or so at least. And then continuing once we did move a little bit closer into another apartment, like, okay, now we're getting serious. What are we looking at? It wasn't like a formal, let's sit down and talk about this. It was just something we talked about almost every day, probably for months, just casually like, okay, what do we want out of this? And everything kind of grew from there.
And did you sit down and figure out, again, like not a formalized, but at least like a budget for what you wanted to spend? And how did you go about doing that?
One thing that we talked about even before we got married, we decided together that we both definitely wanted to live way below our means, less than 50% of our income, just because that's what made us feel safe. Like, just in case one of us lost our jobs,
Sure.
and made it harder to find a job, especially with the growing concern of the pharmacist job market. But also, like, we want to have a family. We're big givers as well. And so it just takes a lot of that stress off, having a big cushion to make all those fit, potentially with Michaela either decreasing work hours or going to zero in the pharmacy in the future. But as far as budget goes, we decided that we wanted to really find a house for $200,000 or less. And I know, like, especially in Columbus, Ohio, where we're from, that is very difficult to do in a nice place for a nice home.
Sure.
But the nice thing about where we moved is that the rural Ohio is much lower cost of living. And we were able to meet that goal of finding a home in that budget.
Yes.
Actually, way under budget.
When we started looking at homes, there were a lot of homes we found that we liked that were more like 250 to 300,000. So, like, I'd say our upper limit kind of became 300,000 with the understanding of we'd much rather not spend $300,000 on a house. So we actually did find a couple that we liked, which we didn't get a chance to put an offer in on. I mean, the market out here isn't quite as crazy as it is in Columbus, but stuff still sells fairly quickly. So it ended up being a good thing because our realtor then kind of pointed us towards the house that we're at now, which was like half of that, way big enough for both of us, you know, and even for a growing family. And yeah, so that, like, we had that budget in mind the whole time, and it did shift a little bit as we were looking, but then it all ended up kind of going back to what we were originally thinking.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's two things in there that I think are really, really important. One is intentionality, right? You guys stepped back and said, like, this is important to us to live slightly below the typical means, right? Or we can live at 50% of our income. And here's why we're doing that, right? The intention behind that is that if we want to cut back on hours, we lose a job, we're not stressing about this home purchase. And I love that. I think that's what's super important. The other thing that you said that I think is interesting, because I advise my clients of this all the time, is that it's super easy to fall in love up to whatever amount, right? If I start looking at $500,000 homes, I'm going to love $500,000 homes. The trick is not to exceed that budget if it's reasonable for your market. And so you guys took a step back and said, yeah, you know what? It's possible to find a nice place under this $200,000 in our market. And again, I know the West Coasters out there are probably like screaming at their radios right now. But the idea is that, you know, you guys took a look at your market and said, this is feasible. And so I'm not going to push it beyond my means because I've set this budget and this is realistic for where I'm looking. And I think that's a really great way to set yourselves up for success. So I admire that a lot. The other thing you mentioned is that you leverage your realtor. And that actually leads us to step number 2, or point number 2 here, which is assembling a team. And this is actually where you and I got connected back in May of this past year. And, you guys came to us, the Real Estate Concierge service, which is a service that we offer to pretty much anyone, that if you want to get connected with a real estate agent, we will actually help you do that. And so again, if you head over to yourfinancialpharmacist.com and head over to buy a home, you can check out the Real Estate Concierge service there. Free way to get connected with an awesome local agent. And again, that's actually how Jacob and Michaela and I got connected. So we got you connected with Sean. And I guess tell us a little bit about that process and what it was like to work with an agent.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys. Thank you again for finding Sean, our realtor. We had no clue on like what realtor, who should we go to? And we heard about your service through YFP. And so we reached out to you. You found us a great realtor. Sean has over 10 years of experience as a realtor. He's also a broker. And he was amazing, mainly because 1, he was super responsive. 2, he found us homes, including the one we ended up buying that we would like. And we didn't think we would like this home. So we didn't put it on our list of liked homes and must see homes. But he's like, I think you guys like it anyway. Let's go. And we looked at I don't know how many homes, but.
Well, the one day, I think it was a Saturday, we did 9 homes on that Saturday, and he had it all set up perfectly. And then honestly, the whole process only took a week or 2 for us because he was just on top of it. And, ultimately we looked at 14 or 15 and this was one of the last ones. And we basically knew going into it, this is something that we're definitely open to buying because it was a great price, great location. Can't really get any better. And I'm just really glad that Sean figured out what we liked so easily and, pointed us to this house because it wasn't really on our radar initially.
And one thing I want to give him praise for too is every house we went into, he pointed out anything that he thought was a potential problem.
Mm.
And so like he was super honest. He wasn't rushed to sell us a home. And so I really trusted him, and I think you really found a great realtor.
Good. I'm so glad. That's awesome. And that's exactly what we want to hear, right? I mean, the agents you work with, it has to be somebody that you can trust. And it's so funny. That's exactly what I try to do for my clients is point out the scary, right? My job is to walk around and look for things that you don't recognize as bad. Well, you just figure out if you're going to like the house. So that's awesome that Sean was able to do that for you guys. Were there other members of the team along the way that were important as well? I know obviously the real estate agent is big, but were there other players that jumped in there as well that you found a lot of value in?
Not really.
Honestly, it all happened very fast.
Yeah. We weren't even really seriously looking for a home.
Yeah, this was just to get our feet wet.
We were actually in the middle of a lease.
Okay.
We were just like looking at homes. We're like, oh, well, it takes about a month or two to start closing on homes. So maybe we should just like start looking at homes for a couple months and then
see what's out there.
And so we started looking at homes, and we found one that like we really liked. And we're like, kind of want to put in an offer, but I still have like 6 months left on my lease. And so I was just like, you know what? Let me call up the landlord tomorrow and see if they'd be okay if we put it off on a home and I moved out early. And we talked to them, and we ended up having an agreement, and we were able to leave early. And so we're like, oh, great. Well, the home that we really liked, apparently some other people really liked too. So it was already gone the next day. But that really opened the door for us to seriously look.
That's great.
Yeah. And I guess that's something else I'd say is don't be afraid to break your lease, because we lived in 3 apartments before buying this house, and we broke our lease every time.
But
which obviously is with their permission.
Yeah,
sure.
Landlord's permission.
Like, obviously it's not ideal, but like, I mean, definitely talk it through with them and see what you can do if you're ready to buy a house. Like, that shouldn't be something holding you back, because usually they will work with you and figure out a deal that way.
It's a great tip, and it's something that I've done with tenants of mine. You know, if I can fill that vacancy quickly, it doesn't bother me who's in that house as long as they're a great tenant. So that makes a lot of sense. That's a good tip. That also leads me to, you talked about putting in an offer and looking for a house, but what about the paying for it, right? So there's the dollars there. So talk to me a little bit about financing, and did you guys have, an idea of how you wanted to finance the home ahead of time, or what did that look like?
I mean, I'm really adverse to debt. I really don't like debt.
Mm-hmm.
And Michaela really let me spearhead this. And so we went in, and I was like, you know what? I want to do, how much down was it? I don't even remember anymore. 15% down?
Well, he would
20% down.
He would have rather paid cash, but reasonably he wanted to do 20%
20% down at 15 year fixed mortgage. But I kept, I listened to YFP. I listened to a lot of other podcasts as well. And I looked at the offer that IBERIABANK has that you guys work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I really couldn't pass up taking advantage of the low interest rates going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking to myself, well, if I want to pay it off early, I can still do that. We didn't necessarily need to do a lower amount, but we ended up doing 5% down on a 30-year fix.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a lot of investing as well. So we are putting every single dollar that we're not spending on a mortgage into investments.
I love that.
So like when you have a 3% mortgage with IBERIABANK, we're like, well, we can make more investing that money, in the meantime than we would if we just kind of threw it at the house.
Yeah.
So that kind of changed his mind over like a month or two.
I definitely get that debt aversion, but it also makes a lot of sense. If you break down the numbers, does it preserve your capital in a way that allows you to do other things, like you said, but travel more, invest better, pay down student debt if you hadn't already done that. Those are the things that flexibility can allow. So I love that you guys took a look at that. And even though you went in with one notion, you evaluated your options and made kind of the best financial move for you guys. That's huge. And for those that want to learn more about that, definitely head over to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. And again, head over to the financing section or the buy a home section, and you can find out more information about IBERIABANK and some of the pharmacist loan options that are out there. A great way to get a low down payment loan without having to get hit with PMI or things like that. So definitely a good option. So then step number 4 would be the search. So actually looking for the property itself. And we've alluded to this a little bit, but talk to us about, that process. What were things that you guys were looking for, or what were things that you learned after seeing a couple of houses, or on that 9-house day? What were things that you learned along that process?
I learned that house hunting is tiring on that 9-house day.
I imagine.
It was a lot of Zillow, a lot of Movado, probably other online websites too for houses. And honestly, Jacob looked at most of that because I got a little overwhelmed with all the options.
Sure.
But something we really wanted, which actually kind of excluded this house initially, was we wanted a 2-car garage. Was one of our main things, because we've kind of done it all. We've done garage, no garage, all of that. So this house that we ended up buying, it only has a 1-car garage, but it has tons of parking, like a carport. You can have everyone over and they don't even need to park in the street. So
nice.
That's kind of why we didn't initially look at this house. And Sean was like, well, let's go look at it. So we started out with Zillow. Once we got hooked up with Sean, he created basically an account for us on, was it MLS? On MLS. And basically every day he would push emails to us of like, here's any changes in the housing, like near you, like new houses, price drops, houses going under contract, coming back on the market, being sold. Like that was super helpful. He'd send it to us after work each day so that he wasn't interrupting our day, and we could look at it, like them, communicate with him, like what we wanted to see, what we weren't interested in, stuff like that. And then from there, he would call Jacob up and be like, hey, I have a list of these houses. Let's go see them like tomorrow if you're free, or whatever the next day you were free was. And I mean, really, he just kind of led the way on them, was like, here's the houses you liked, here's houses I think you would like, and kind of all over our price range too. Like we saw stuff under our budget, not over our budget, but on the higher end of our budget, and kind of just pieced together from there what we really wanted and what was important to us.
Yeah, and sometimes just getting out there and seeing it in person can make all the difference. You might think there's one thing that's super important, or not realize something that is important to you until you get out, see a house that has that particular feature, and recognize that. So that's great. And I also love the tip about the auto emails. That's something I recommend for a lot of my clients, is get that auto email set up so that you are getting daily alerts. It helps you really learn the market so that you can move quickly. If you're just looking at everything on Friday afternoon and then scrambling to try to react to the properties that have come up in the week, it's going to be tricky. But if you can get that daily, just take 20 or 30 minutes out of your day to really learn that market, see what properties are coming available, you'll have a lot more chance at the good properties, and you'll know what the right price point is because you're starting to learn that market and see what's becoming available. So great tips. And then once you actually found the property, I know we've talked a little bit about this, but talk to me about that negotiation process, because step number 5 is all about putting that deal together. And so I know negotiations are hard in the current market where there's not a lot of wiggle room, but what did that look like? What was the putting together the offer process like?
So Sean was really great with this too, because the house that we really liked, ended up buying, that we're living in now, we actually were able to get for asking price.
Nice.
So out here in eastern rural Ohio, it's a little different than Columbus, obviously, but we knew when we were here, he was in contact with the seller's realtor, and she told him like, hey, there's another offer on the table today. Like, do they want it or not? So basically we were sitting in his office at 8 p.m., like kind of putting together our offer. We knew like that this is a house that we would really like, that, it could be the house that we're buying, and we're like, well, let's offer them asking price. They'd already dropped the price $5,000, I think. This particular house was on the market for
over 30 days.
It was like 30 days. Some houses go within a week out here. Some of them are on the market for months. Depending on the house, because there's not that many people in rural Ohio. But so completely different from the big cities. So basically, we did asking price, but we also really wanted this house, so we added an escalation clause in just in case, which went, I think, like 8,000 over maybe.
And can you enlighten our audience about what an escalation clause actually means?
Yeah, so basically, if you have an escalation clause on your offer, it means that you're willing to go up so much more money, if the other person bid higher than you or offered higher than you on the house. So like if you're offering $200,000 and another person offers $205,000, but if you have an escalation clause going up to $210,000, they could take your $210,000 offer, or $206,000 at that point, or something slightly higher than what the other person offered if your clause goes above that.
Yep, that's spot on. It's a great way to protect you from bidding against yourself, right? Because then you can put in 200,000 and you pay 200K if that's the final price. But if there are other offers, you can still protect yourself by getting higher than, just slightly higher than those next offers. So thank you.
So hopefully it keeps you out of a bidding war.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, putting the offer in, I think the deadline was given to us by the seller's realtor was like 9 p.m. or something. And he faxed over all the papers at 8:55 and called her like, they're on their way, And
Nice.
basically we knew an hour after that they
verbally accepted.
Yeah, they verbally accepted our offer like an hour after that. So
Great. Yeah.
it was a very fast process, I feel like, and probably a little less stressful than it is in the big cities for us, but at least putting the offer down was really simple.
Still, yeah, it sounded like crunch time, decisions though, and faxing at 0 hours.
It happened very fast.
Yeah, that's great. And did you have inspection contingencies on the home as well? I know some people are out there waiving inspection contingencies. What did that look like?
We did have an inspection. I guess something I should mention is we also offered to cover closing costs. I know that's a big like deal maker or breaker anymore, but we did have an inspection, and Jacob can talk more about that process.
Okay. So I scheduled an inspection with one of the 6 recommended inspectors that our realtor gave us contact info for. Mm-hmm. And so I did some price shopping with them and got to know the guys who did it. And I picked one. We scheduled a time before our closing date, and they came in and they agreed to meet them at the house while they did the inspection. They kind of showed me what they were looking at. And then they gave me a full report, photos and descriptions of the inspection. Probably 2 days later, It's like 80 pages. Right. And so we got to look through them, and they highlighted the things that they thought were a big concern and that what we should look at before closing. So what that led to is that we showed our realtor that report too. And most of the things were like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just fix those problems. Mm-hmm. And our realtor was like, no. The sellers are going to fix those for you. And so we're going to use this contingency and try to barter to see what we can get them to fix before we close. And we went back and forth probably 4 times with the sellers. That sounds about right. And our realtor ended up saving us $5,000 in repairs.
And just some of the stuff was bigger, but some of it was just little stuff that were literally it's fine, and some of the bigger stuff, the sellers are like, well, we'll split it 50-50 with you guys. And Jacob and I are like, okay, that's fine. And Sean's like, no, you're not paying for it. And he's like, you guys offered asking price, they're going to pay for it. And we're like, okay, sure, we'll see what happens. And like Jacob said, I mean, they basically agreed to everything except tightening a railing outside. Literally $5,000 worth of stuff they got done for us before we closed. Can't thank Sean enough for that.
That's great.
Because we had no idea. We're like, oh, this is fine, they're never going to agree to that. They did.
And that's exactly why you have a good real estate agent to lean on, right? Because again, without that experience, without that know-how, we're lost out. So that's a big important point. The other thing I think is great there is that, you guys went into it with this idea of I'm going to offer full asking. And so because of that, there's a renegotiation process that may occur. And so there's two, I think a lot of people assume as soon as you put that offer in, that's it, you're done. That's what we're buying the house for. But the reality is you can go back to them and there's renegotiations that can occur if you have the right contingencies in place. And again, lean on your agent for that. But that's a really important factor to making sure you're getting a good deal. So that's awesome. Well, that leads to our last step, which is step number 6, all about closing. So you've gone through, found the house, put the offer in, renegotiated on the fixes and everything. And now you're ready to actually, sign the paperwork. So talk to us a little bit about the closing process, anything that surprised you or things that you learned during that.
I'd say it was pretty straightforward for us. I mean, basically with all of the negotiations that happened ahead of time, we knew exactly what we were getting, exactly what to expect. We did come walk through the house before we closed. I think the same morning we closed. Yeah, just to make sure, everything was done. Everything was what they said they would do. From there, everything was good. Sean was there at closing with us for the first part. And then once you actually get into the more financial stuff with the bank, your realtor leaves and, says, see you later. And so I guess that was kind of surprising. I'm like, oh, okay. So he's not here, but it makes sense too. So yeah, just that he would come for a little bit of it.
I remember when I bought my first house, I thought that like my agent was going to be there like waiting with the keys as soon as I signed, and he was like going to drop them in my hand. But then there was the whole like title had to actually transfer, and there was the like you're working with the bank first and then finishing the deal. Was that your experience as well?
So we got the keys at closing.
Nice. That's pretty rare these days. That's awesome.
Yeah, we didn't have to wait till after for it in our case, at least. So, I mean, that was kind of what I expected. And I guess what I assumed was the norm. But I mean, I also wouldn't be surprised if it does have to wait a while.
No, that's good. And again, that is it's more rare these days. And again, some states even require you to have different levels of closing with a lawyer and present, things like that. So it's nice when you can actually do it all in one fell swoop like that. That's excellent.
Yeah, and we had kind of asked Sean, like, do we need an attorney to be there with us? Are we good? And he's like, well, unless you have any questions about, the stuff that's already been fixed or gone over, like everything. He basically had already gone over everything with us, and there wasn't any surprises with it. So,
And there's a lawyer at the title company.
Yeah, and depending on your state, that may vary, right? Some states will actually require that you have a lawyer present or that they're actually the one doing the closing with you. But again, in Ohio, where we are, that's not the case. So good to lean on your agent there for the local guidelines. Well, great. Well, Jacob, Michaela, I really appreciate you guys sharing your story. I think, again, it's a tricky time to be a first-time home buyer, but you guys are proof that it can be quite easily done. And again, we're, YFP is here to help you guys if there's something to make the process easier. We're along for that same ride. Any final thoughts or other tips you can share with our listeners?
Well, I can share like one thing that we did not include in our search talk, but we were actually looking at a home that we could potentially rent out in the future.
Oh, yes.
Once we outgrow it.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a while before we outgrow it because, there's plenty of space here. But we were looking for a home that we potentially could rent out or even hack out. And we found this home, and the offer we put in fits the 1% rule that a lot of landlords like to follow when they're looking for a good home. But also, I wanted to make sure we bought a home that we could increase the value on. And there's a lot of opportunity to do that in this home. But we also found that this was in a neighborhood of like 20 homes. This is like the second lowest valued home in the neighborhood. So we feel like we can really use that to help increase the value of this home if we end up selling it.
Yeah, and part of the plan with this home too, we'll be here for a while, but eventually it's something that, we could easily rent out in the future because it's a great size for a rental home, and it's actually really close to the highway. Like, you can see the highway, you can't necessarily hear it all the time, but it's in its own little neighborhood, but in a really good location for people just passing through. So that was something that was always in the back of our mind that we knew we kind of wanted. Our realtor knew we wanted it. You knew we were looking for it, Nate. So that was something that just kind of like fit together well with the home we ended up getting as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that, you're a shameless plug for our other show, the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast with David Bright and I as co-hosts. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely do so. And maybe we'll have Jacob and Michaela on that show once they turn this property over and start renting it out. I love it. Well, again, guys, really appreciate you guys being with us today and sharing your story. Where can people reach out if they want to get in touch with you?
They can reach me at my email, jacobsoppe@yahoo.com. Soppe is spelled S like Sam, O-P-P-E.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure we put that in the show notes. And again, thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thank
you, Nate.
Before we wrap up today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, I want to again thank our sponsor, the American Pharmacists Association. APHA is every pharmacist ally advocating on your behalf to address the issues that are affecting you most, such as PBM and payment reform, value over volume, and provider status. Make sure to join a bolder APHA to gain premier access to financial educational resources and to receive discounts on YFP products and services. You can join APHA at a 25% discount by visiting pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Again, that's pharmacist.com/join using the coupon code YFP.